Welcome to episode 8 of R&R Living Life. Hi, my name is Rosemary. After a quiet night, Rick and I made our way to many peaks and then on to Albany, travelling through country that had recently been burnt and now knew the reason for the concerned lady's visit the previous day. Many Peaks was first developed in 1949 as part of the Many Peaks Land Settlement Project. We stopped at the community centre to check the boat and gidget before having a quick look around, where we were surprised at the exceptional conditions of the tennis courts and the fantastic pizza oven out the back of the community centre. On leaving Many Peaks, we passed through flatter grazing country dotted with Angus cattle and the occasional sheep, with the ranges in the distance before arriving in Albany. Albany is the southernmost town and seaport in Western Australia, with the town servicing an area of wine growing and dairy, beef, lamb, fruit, and potato farming. After checking out the visitor centre, we parked up for the morning at the Amity Keys Rest RV parking, where we sat and enjoyed the magnificent views over the deep blue waters of Princess Royal Harbour, part of King George Sound, one of the largest natural harbours in the world and one of the country's great deep water harbours. As we walked back up into town, we passed the replica of the H.M. colonial brig Amity and the Museum of the Great Southern, the site of the first European settlement in Western Australia, full of the unique natural and social history of the region. The first Europeans into the area was Pieter Noots, who, in 1627, sailed around the southern coast of Western Australia and across the Great Australian Bight. His reports of the area were less than enthusiastic, and consequently the Dutch in Batavia showed no interest in settling the barren coastline. Then in 1791 the harbour was visited and charted by George Vancouver. On the afternoon of Christmas Day 1826, the H.M. colonial brig Amity, built in Canada in 1816, sailed into King George Sound, carrying 20 troops and 23 convicts, becoming the first European settlement in the state of Western Australia. Originally a penal colony military post named Fredericktown. It wasn't until 1832 when the outpost's name was changed to Albany. From a settlement that grew from a penal outpost military garrison that laid the foundation of the state to a busy port which was a key part in the early industrial development of Australia, through its whaling, pastoralism, and coastal shipping that serviced the scattered settlements, Albany has a wealth of history. In those early years, King George Sound contained the only safe deep water port for the southwest coastal shipping for the colony until 1897. Having been settled before Perth, it played a major role in the early decades of the Swan River colony. In 1831, Albany was proclaimed as part of the Swan River colony, during which the town was surveyed and blocks of land were sold to free settlers, with convicts being returned to New South Wales if they had not completed their sentences. A replica of the brig Amity stands next to the site of the first settlement, beside a small freshwater stream that runs into Princess Royal Harbour. It was not hard to enjoy Albany, or impossible not to be entranced by its history. We read the many information posts along the main street, full of interesting history. From Albany we made our way to the picturesque caravan park on the banks of the Kalgan River. The next morning we woke to the raucous laughter of the kookaburras and the delightful sound of other birds, before making our way to Rotary Lookout, with panoramic views of King George Sound. From there we continued up to the Albany Heritage Park on Mount Clarence and Mount Adelaide. Firstly to the Desert Mounted Corps Memorial, commonly known as the Light Horse Memorial. Dispersed beside the commemorative stairs that led to the memorial were soldiers' reflections. At the summit of Mount Clarence, a 9-metre tall statue stands facing east, showcasing a mounted Australian light horseman defending a New Zealand mounted rifleman standing beside his wounded horse. The statue is a recast of the original that was erected in 1932 at Port Said in Egypt, where Australian soldiers landed when they reached Africa before heading for Gallipoli. However, the granite blocks, including bullet holes, are originally from the original statue before it was irreparably damaged during the Suez Crisis in 1956. The memorial commemorates the men of the Australian Light Horse Brigade, the New Zealand Mounted Rifles, the Imperial Camel Corps, and the Australian Flying Corps, who died in service or were killed in action in Egypt, Palestine, and Syria during World War One. Padre White Lookout is a steel walkway located at the top of Mount Clarence with amazing views of the landscape. Padre White served as an army chaplain with the 44th Battalion and on his return continued to deliver sermons in remembrance of locals who lost lives in the First World War. The lookout marks the spot where Padre White stood in 1930 after leading a pilgrimage from St John's Church to Mount Clarence in what is claimed to have been the first ever observance of dawn service on Anzac Day in Australia. The National Anzac Centre is located within the grounds of the heritage-listed Princess Royal Fortress, which was one of the two pre-Federation fortresses built to protect intercontinental trade routes and played a key role in the first national strategy to defend Australia, along with being the oldest surviving military site in Western Australia. The centre holds a treasure trove of military history with the focus on the 10th Light Horse Regiment and overlooks the actual location from which over 41,000 Australians and New Zealanders left Australia bound for the Great War. During our visit to the centre, we assumed the identity of an actual serviceman and followed his experience of the Great War through training and embarkment, life on the convoys, and the conflict in World War One. A thought-provoking exhibition in the Pool of Reflection, where the names of 41,265 Australians and New Zealanders who left on the first and second convoys are recorded, was overwhelming. It was an amazing and interesting collection, presented in a thoughtful and poignant way. For both of us, it was certainly a very moving and emotional experience. The convoys which left King George Sound chose Albany as a place to gather due to the defences and protection the fortress was able to provide the fleet. If it was not for the Princess Royal Fortress, the convoy would never have gathered in such numbers in one position. From the summit of Mount Adelaide at Convoy Lookout, we could see where on 1st of November 1914 a great fleet of 38 transport ships assembled with 7 warships as escorts before travelling in convoy via Ceylon and the Suez Canal to training camps in Egypt. From there, servicemen would be directed to the various theatres of war. From the information boards we could see where the ships had been anchored before departing Albany. From poignant modern history to incredible natural history at Porongurup National Park, where steep cliffs gave way to dramatic rock formations, we visited Natural Bridge and the Gap. With sweeping views over the Southern Ocean that stretches south to the shores of Antarctica, Natural Bridge is a granite formation that looks just like a giant rock bridge, with a 24-metre drop into where the ocean rushes into a large cavern and rock formation, caused by the gradual wearing away of the granite by the Great Southern Ocean. A true reminder of the power of the ocean. The Gap, a crevice between sheer 25-metre high granite cliffs, where Rick ventured out onto the cantilevered viewing platform that sits 40 metres above the surging sea, was not for me. The lookout platform is supported by 5 cantilevered beams that follow the shape of the rock surface and extend over 10 metres from their last contact point, across the top of the exposed granite rock covered in vulnerable plants and lichens, and is anchored securely to stable rock, away from natural faults and joins near the cliff face. I was mesmerised by the waves that rolled in from the ocean, crashing into the granite cliffside, and the buffeting rush of the wind and spray from the ocean below. Both the Gap and Natural Bridge are stunning examples of ancient weathering and formation processes in action. Green Island sits just offshore to the southwest, while to the east lies Cable Beach. We had enjoyed spectacular views of the Southern Ocean and this ancient coastline from Bald Head to West Cape Howie. It was mid-afternoon as we began trekking down the 78 steps to the blowholes. natural crevices in the granite rocks, where when the sea is running a decent swell or big waves are breaking at the base of Peak Head in the east, water shoots high into the air. We had made it halfway down the steps before we took returning sightseers' advice and abandoned the trek, as there was little to see, but views from the pathway did compensate for the lack of action. After returning to the car park, we made our way to Whalewell, located at the end of Frenchman Bay Road, but as it was so close to closing time, we did not venture inside. We continued along the road to Jimmy Newell's Harbour, a quiet, protected little inlet, having been named after an ex-convict who, caught by a storm, managed to steer his fishing boat into the calm waters. From Mount Melville, we were again presented with spectacular views of the surrounding area. Rick climbed to the top of the water tower while I wandered around at ground level. Away in the distance, I could just make out the Albany wind farm with its 18 turbines, 12 kilometres southwest of the city centre. On average, there are only 7 days a year when the wind is not strong enough to turn the turbines. The joys of the Albany doctor. The wind turbines do not have gearboxes, which helps keep maintenance to a minimum. They operate at variable speeds, which means that the blades speed up and slow down with the wind. Wind as low as 7 kilometres per hour sets the blades turning, but when the wind speed reaches 120 kilometres per hour, the turbines slow down to prevent damage. At top speeds, the blades appear to move very slowly, one revolution every 3 seconds. However, the ends of the blades are travelling at 290 kilometres per hour. Our time in Albany came quickly to an end, though there was still lots to see. From Albany, we made our way to Castle Rock in the Porongurup National Park. Was I in for a treat? Let's just go for a walk, Rick said. Little was I to know that it was the challenging climb to the granite skywalk he had in mind. But off I went. Steps? Who said anything about steps? There were long, steep sections with uneven sized steps and untouched natural surfaces. A good level of fitness, it said. The steep climb through changing forests of Yale, Mari, and Kiri trees, not to mention the tiger snake, culminated at the Balancing Rock, while around the corner we were rewarded with stunning views from Kiri Lookout. It was well worth all the huffing and puffing of climbing 2 kilometres of challenging trail. Yes, it truly was a rewarding experience in the end. Rick scrambled over the large granite rock before climbing the 7-metre ladder to the skywalk, where he was rewarded with spectacular views. Over 1,100 million years in the making, the 15-kilometre long Porongurup Range is the relic core of an ancient mountain range formed in the Precambrian period over 1,200 million years ago, with the striking granite outcrop of Castle Rock, a 670-metre peak, one of the many peaks situated in the range. The skywalk is truly an engineering wonder that wraps around a vertical rock face. I read that riggers have abseiled into location around the rock face to drill the anchor points into the granite before gluing and testing for stress. Farming in the surrounding districts did not start until around 1859, when vegetables were first grown on the southern slopes of the range. The giant kari and jarrah trees of the range were first harvested for timber in the 1880s, until timber leases began to be withdrawn in 1925. The view stretches across the park and farmland to as far away as Albany on the south coast, Mount Gardner, Mount Many Peaks to the southeast, and the Stirling Range to the north. After catching my breath and giving the legs a good rest, we made our way down the steps. I was glad to make camp that afternoon at the Porongurup Caravan Park on the northern slopes of the mountain range, where I enjoyed the tranquility of the park and the abundant wildlife. Porongurup's main industries include dairying, viticulture, plantations of Tasmanian blue gums, and some vegetable crops that are grown in the area. After a refreshing night's sleep, Rick and I made our way to the rural town of Mount Barker, a seemingly quiet, pleasant town surrounded by gently rolling hills and with an unusual, winding and colourful main street. From the centre of town we made our way to the lookout on Mount Barker summit, 404 metres above sea level, about 6 kilometres southwest of the town, with views of the surrounding countryside and a TV transmission site which boasts a tower that is said to be one of the tallest freestanding structures in the southern hemisphere. The panoramic views from the observation stand and the Captain Colette Barker Memorial Stone included views of the Stirling and Porongurup Ranges and Wilson Inlet at Denmark. Back in town, we enjoyed a number of historic buildings, including the historic police station built by convict labour, the incredible street art, as well as the redback spider on the wall not far from Mount Barker Country Bakery. The delectable delights in this shop were staggering, from savoury, sweet, and bread products. It was difficult to choose what I wanted and kept changing my mind as I looked along the glass cabinets. The shop was extremely busy, so eventually decided on a sausage roll and a seafood pie. I was in heaven. So delicious. If you are ever in Mount Barker and a foodie, the bakery is the place not to be missed. From the bakery, we ventured to the old railway station, come visitors' information centre just off the highway. The station was constructed in 1923 and restored in 1994. At the time of construction, it was regarded as the most imposing and up-to-date structure of its time. The terracotta roof tiles and the roof timbers and other timber work were of special note. The internal bricks of the building were made locally at the Kendanup Brickworks. On the way back to Gidget, we took a side tour along the gravel Angwin Road to Range Lookout, past boutique wineries and the stunning scenic landscape of the Stirling Ranges, before returning to camp, where I spent the remainder of the afternoon bird watching while Rick greased Gidget. We will leave you for this episode as the sun sets on another jam-packed day. Give us a thumbs up if you liked this episode. Join us next time as we check out the Stirling Ranges. Take care and stay safe. Cheers for now, Rick and Rosemary. R&R Living Life.